My sister-in-law told my stalker ex where to find me. Now he won't leave me alone. My ex Jake chased me through our neighborhood with a machete 3 years ago during his first psychotic break. After his schizophrenia diagnosis, I stayed to help, took him to every appointment, managed his medications, kept him safe. I only left when he threatened to turn me and Sam into pasture for his bloodhounds after I started dating again. The only remaining connection was through Jess, my brother's girlfriend. She'd been Jake's friend since high school and refused to pick sides. When I got pregnant in January, I told family but asked them to keep it quiet. 24 hours later, Jake left me a voicemail claiming he'd file for custody of his baby. We hadn't spoken in over a year. He didn't know where I lived or worked. Only Jess could have told him. He deserved to know, she said when confronted. He's better now with his medication. He threatened to kill me, Jess. That was during an episode. He's stable now. I made her promise. No more information about me or the baby. She swore she understood. Last weekend was my baby shower. 80 guests at a rented venue, supposed to be perfect. Then I saw Jake at the bar, scanning the crowd. Security tried escorting him out. He bit one of them, screaming that I was carrying his child, that we'd never really broken up, that Sam had stolen me. It took 5 people to remove him. I confronted Jess immediately. How could I keep your baby shower secret? She actually said. He's my friend too. I told you to tell him nothing. I didn't think he'd actually come. I cut her off, told her she was dead to me. My brother begged me to forgive her, said I shouldn't punish him for her mistakes. 2 days later, Jake showed up at my prenatal appointment. Somehow knew exactly when and where. Had to leave through the back while security detained him. Yesterday, he was outside my workplace with flowers, telling everyone he was surprising his pregnant fiancée. I haven't told him anything since the shower. Jess swore when my brother called. I promise. But Jake knew things. My appointment times, Sam's work schedule, which days I was alone. This morning, I found out how. Jake had created a Facebook page, Fighting for My Baby, a father's rights story. Hundreds of followers. Photos of me from years ago, ultrasound images that weren't mine but looked real, long posts about how I was keeping his child away due to mental health discrimination. The comments were terrifying. People calling me ableist, offering legal advice, some offering to help him rescue his baby. One comment stood out. Stay strong, Jake. The truth always comes out. Jess Maxwell. I screenshot everything and called my brother. Your girlfriend is publicly supporting my stalker. That's not, she wouldn't. I sent the screenshots. Silence. An hour later. I went through her phone. She's been messaging him for months, sending photos from family events, your ultrasound pictures, Sam's work schedule. Oh my God. She's been feeding his delusions, telling him you still love him, that Sam is controlling you, that once the baby's born you'll come back. I dropped the phone. There's more. She had a draft message ready to send with your home address and the hospital where you're delivering. Your due date's in 2 weeks. Where is she now? She left an hour ago, said she was meeting a friend. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A photo of Jess and Jake at a coffee shop, looking at something on his phone. Maps. Another text. Your sister-in-law is very helpful. See you soon. Both of us. Sam grabbed his keys. We're leaving. Now. As we packed, Jess called, crying. I'm sorry. I thought if he just saw you, talk to you, he'd accept reality. I didn't know he'd bring people. What people? There's a van outside your house. Men from some father's rights group. They have cameras. They're live streaming. Jake told them you're about to flee with his baby. I looked outside. White van pulling up. Jake got out first, followed by 5 men with cameras and signs reading, Fathers have rights, and stop parental alienation. The whole internet is watching, Jess sobbed. Thousands of viewers. They think you're the villain. The doorbell rang. Police! Someone shouted. But something was off about the voice. Sam checked his phone. The live stream showed our front door. The title, Liv, confronting my baby's kidnapper. She can't hide anymore. Jake was speaking to the camera. She's inside with the man who stole her from me. They're planning to run away with my child. We're here to stop a kidnapping in progress. The door shook. They were trying to force it open. Sam dialed 911, but the live stream chat was faster. Someone had already called reporting a woman holding a baby hostage. The police will side with them, I whispered. They think I'm the criminal. Another bang at the door. The frame cracked. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice from the back of the house. I'm in. Back door was unlocked. It was Jake. He was already inside. Sam grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front door as Jake's voice came from somewhere in the back of the house. He was calling my name in this sing-song way that made my skin crawl, like we were playing some kind of game. The men outside kept pounding on the front door and I could hear their voices through the wood, narrating everything to their cameras. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing in my pocket, and I knew without looking that the video was spreading everywhere. Thousands of people watching what they thought was some kind of custody fight. Sam put his finger to his lips and pointed toward our bedroom. The truck was parked on the side street, but both doors were blocked now, so we'd have to go out a window. I was 9 months pregnant, and the thought of climbing through a window terrified me. What if I got stuck? What if I hurt the baby? Jake's footsteps moved through the kitchen, and I heard him open the fridge like he still lived here. He called out that he just wanted to talk, that we could work this out like a family, and his voice sounded so normal it was almost worse than if he'd been yelling. We made it to the bedroom just as the front door started to splinter. Sam pushed the window open and went through first, landing in the bushes below. He reached back up for me and I tried to fit my belly through the frame. For a second I thought I wasn't going to make it, but Sam grabbed my arms and pulled while I pushed with my legs. Behind me, I heard Jake realize we were escaping and his voice changed completely. He started screaming that I couldn't take his baby away, that I was a kidnapper, that he had rights. My shirt caught on something and tore as Sam pulled me through. We both fell into the bushes and I felt branches scraping my arms, but I didn't care. We were out. Sam pulled me to my feet and we started running across the neighbor's yard. I heard the front door finally give way and the men burst inside. Their cameras were still rolling and I knew they were spreading through the house looking for us. Someone must have seen us from a window because I heard yelling about our location. My phone kept buzzing and I pulled it out while we ran. The live stream chat was moving so fast I could barely read it, but people were giving advice on which way we probably went. They were helping Jake hunt us down. Sam's truck was maybe 30 yards away when Jake came around the side of the house at a full run. He was so much faster than us and I was struggling to move with my belly weighing me down. Every step sent pain through my back and I was scared my water was going to break right there in the street. Sam positioned himself between Jake and me as we reached the truck. He had the keys in his hand already, but Jake was closing the distance fast. Then Jake stopped about 10 feet away with his hands up. For just a second, he looked like the man I used to love before everything went wrong. He was crying and his voice broke when he begged me to just listen. He said Jess told him I still loved him, that Sam was keeping us apart, that once I saw him I'd remember. The Father's Rights group had their cameras pointed at us from the front porch, and they were narrating this whole thing like Jake was some kind of hero trying to see his kid. I wanted to scream at them that they had it all wrong, but I couldn't make my voice work. That's when I heard the sirens. 2 patrol cars came around the corner fast, and a detective got out before his car even stopped moving. He took one look at the cameras and the crowd and Jake's wild eyes and seemed to understand this wasn't a normal domestic situation. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand, and when he asked what was happening, the words just tumbled out. I told him about Jess and the stalking and Jake being inside our house and the Facebook page and everything. Jake tried to tell the detective that I was confused. He said pregnancy hormones were making me crazy and he was the father and he had rights to see his child. The detective asked Jake for proof that he was the father. Jake pulled out a whole stack of printed Facebook messages from Jess. They had my pregnancy symptoms listed out, my due date, even my doctor's name. The detective's face changed as he read through them, and I could see him realizing how much detailed information Jake had been collecting. The Father's Rights group started chanting about parental rights and how men get discriminated against. Their phones were still streaming to what looked like thousands of viewers now. The detective called for backup to clear the crowd and tried to move Jake away from me, but Jake got more upset when the officers touched him. He kept insisting he had a right to be near his child's mother, and the crowd was backing him up. I showed the detective my phone with all the threatening texts and screenshots of Jake's Facebook page. I showed him the photo of Jess and Jake at the coffee shop looking at maps. He called for a female officer right away and said she'd take my statement somewhere safe while he dealt with Jake and the crowd. Sam refused to leave my side as they walked us to a patrol car. His hand stayed on my back the whole time like he was afraid someone would try to grab me. The police station felt too bright after everything that just happened. Detective Putnam led us to a small room with a table and chairs, and Sam stayed right next to me the whole time. The detective pulled out a notepad and started explaining how this was more complicated than a regular stalking case because of Jake's mental health history. He said they needed to figure out if Jake was able to understand what he'd done wrong, or if he needed to go to a hospital instead of jail. My hands were shaking. So bad I had to sit on them. The detective kept talking about how the live stream had blown up online and was already at over 50,000 views. Local news stations were calling the police department asking for information. Sam asked what that meant for us, and Detective Putnam said it meant we needed to be really careful, because people on the internet now thought they knew our whole story. Officer Marguerite Lozano came in with coffee and sat down across from me. She had kind eyes and she told me to take my time telling them everything. So I started from the beginning, from 3 years ago, when Jake chased me through the neighborhood with that machete. I told them about his diagnosis and how I stayed to help him, about all the appointments and medications. I explained how I only left when he threatened to kill me and Sam. Officer Lozano took notes while I talked, and Detective Putnam recorded everything on his phone. When I got to the part about Jess, they both leaned forward. I showed them all the screenshots from Jake's Facebook page and the messages between Jess and Jake that my brother had found. Detective Putnam said what Jess did wasn't just being a bad friend. It was actually a crime called stalking by proxy. My phone kept buzzing on the table and I could see it was my brother calling over and over, 6 times during the interview. I couldn't talk to him yet because I was too angry and felt too betrayed. Officer Lozano asked if I wanted her to turn my phone off and I nodded. She powered it down and set it aside. Detective Putnam excused himself to make a phone call and came back 20 minutes later. He'd contacted someone named Alec Navarro, who used to be Jake's psychiatrist. Dr. Navarro told him Jake had stopped taking his medications 4 months ago, even though the doctor told him not to. The psychiatrist explained that when Jake's delusions got bad, they usually focused on past relationships, and he could get really dangerous when he thought someone was keeping him from something he believed was his. Detective Putnam said this information was really important because it meant they could put Jake in a psychiatric hospital right away, instead of just arresting him. While we were still giving our statement, there was a commotion in the hallway outside. I heard my brother's voice demanding to see me, and Detective Putnam went out to talk to him. Through the door, I could hear my brother saying he'd left Jess at their apartment and found more stuff on her laptop. He sounded upset and kept saying he needed to show me something right away. Detective Putnam brought him into the room and my brother looked terrible, like he'd been crying. He had his laptop bag with him and he pulled out a folder of printed papers. Bank statements showing payments from someone named Sarah to Jess's account. $3,000 total over the past few months. My brother's hands were shaking as he showed me messages where Jess promised Jake's mother she could bring Jake and me back together if she just had enough details about my life. I felt sick looking at it all. This wasn't just Jess being stupid or misguided. She'd been getting paid to stalk me. Detective Putnam took the bank statements and started making notes. He said this changed everything, because now they could charge Jess with financial fraud and conspiracy on top of the stalking charges. My brother sat down hard in one of the chairs and put his head in his hands. He kept saying he was sorry, that he should have seen what Jess was doing. Tears were running down his face and he showed me more messages where Jess told Jake's mother exactly when I'd be alone, what doctor's office I used, where Sam worked. She'd been so detailed and careful about it. I wanted to be mad at my brother, but looking at him I could see he'd been fooled just like I had. Officer Lozano brought him some tissues and he wiped his face. He told me he'd broken up with Jess as soon as he found the laptop evidence and moved his stuff out of their apartment. He said he knew I probably hated him, but he needed me to know he never would have let this happen if he'd known. Detective Putnam got another phone call and stepped out again. When he came back, he said Jake was being taken to county hospital for evaluation. A doctor there had determined Jake was a danger to himself and other people, so they were putting him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. That meant Jake would be locked in the hospital for at least 3 days while doctors figured out what to do with him. About an hour later, Detective Putnam told us that Jake's mother had arrived at the hospital from 3 states away. She'd driven all night after seeing the live stream online. The detective said she was really upset when she found out Jake had stopped his medications and that Jess had been helping his delusions get worse. Jake's mom was cooperating with the police and had brought all of Jake's medical records and history to help with the case. Sam asked if we could go home and Detective Putnam shook his head. He said our house was surrounded by news vans and people from those fathers' rights groups who still believed Jake's version of everything. It wasn't safe for us to go back there. I didn't know where we were supposed to go. My best friend Anya called Sam's phone since mine was turned off. Her dad was Detective Putnam, so she'd heard what happened. She told Sam we could stay at her apartment and that she'd already made up the guest room. Detective Putnam said he'd personally take us there and help us get some of our stuff from the house. We drove back to our place with Detective Putnam following in his car. There were 4 news vans parked on the street and a small group of men still standing on the sidewalk with their signs. Detective Putnam went and talked to them while Sam and I went inside through the back door. The house felt wrong now, like it wasn't safe anymore. We threw clothes and toiletries into bags as fast as we could. I grabbed my prenatal vitamins and the folder with all my medical paperwork. Sam got his laptop and some work clothes. We were only inside for maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like forever. As we were leaving, I got this sharp pain in my stomach that made me double over. Sam caught me before I fell and asked if I was okay. Another pain hit and I realized this might be contractions. We were 2 weeks from my due date, but all the stress might have triggered early labor. Detective Putnam saw me bent over in pain and immediately called for an ambulance. Sam was freaking out asking if the baby was coming and I couldn't answer because the pain was so bad. The ambulance got there in under 10 minutes and the paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher. Sam climbed in with me and we headed to the hospital with Detective Putnam following behind. At the emergency room, they got me into a bed right away and paged my doctor. Dr. Connor Shaw showed up still wearing his regular clothes because he'd been home for the evening. He checked me over and did an ultrasound while I tried not to panic about the baby. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Dr. Shaw told me the cramping was something called Braxton Hicks contractions, not real labor. The baby wasn't coming yet, but my blood pressure was way too high, and he was worried about me. He said I needed to be on bed rest for the next few days at least. He wrote everything down in my chart for the restraining order case we'd have to file, noting that the stalking was causing dangerous medical problems. They kept me in the hospital for a few hours to monitor the baby and make sure my blood pressure came down. Sam never left my side, and Detective Putnam waited in the hallway the whole time. When they finally released me around midnight, Detective Putnam drove us to Anya's apartment himself. Anya had stayed up waiting, and she hugged me as soon as we walked in. She'd made up the guest room with fresh sheets and had snacks and water bottles on the nightstand. I was so exhausted I could barely stand, but I couldn't sleep yet. Anya pulled up the live stream on her laptop because I needed to see what people were saying. The video had over 200,000 views now. The comment section was full of people supporting Jake and calling me terrible names. They said I was a vindictive ex trying to keep a father from his child. They said I was discriminating against Jake because of his mental illness. Some comments said Sam had brainwashed me. The fathers' rights groups had made me their big cause and were sharing the video everywhere. Anya showed me posts on different websites where people had shared our address and Sam's workplace information. We were being doxxed by hundreds of strangers who believed Jake's delusion was real. Some of the comments were scary, people saying they hoped someone would rescue the baby from me. Sam took the laptop away and closed it. He said I didn't need to see any more of that right now, but I kept thinking about all those people out there who thought I was the bad guy in this situation. Detective Putnam texted Sam around 2 a.m. saying he was still at the police station working on our case. He'd contacted something called the FBI Cybercrimes Division, because the doxing and online harassment involved people from different states, which made it a federal issue. He was building a case against Jake and Jess, but also against the leaders of the father's rights group who'd organized the invasion of our house. By the time the sun came up, Detective Putnam had enough evidence to request emergency restraining orders against 5 people, Jake and Jess and 3 men who'd been at our house with cameras. The courthouse was old and smelled like cleaning products and paper. Sam held my hand while we waited in the hallway outside the courtroom. My brother sat 2 chairs down, not looking at either of us. Detective Putnam stood near the door talking to a woman in a dark suit who I figured was the prosecutor. My stomach hurt and the baby kept kicking like she could feel how nervous I was. I'd barely slept in 2 days thinking about seeing Jake again, even if it was just on a video screen. A bailiff opened the courtroom doors and called our names. Inside, the judge sat behind a big wooden desk that made him look small. The prosecutor, Harley Grimes, introduced herself and shook my hand. She had short gray hair and wore glasses on a chain around her neck. She told me to sit in the front row and just answer honestly if the judge asked me anything. On a large monitor mounted to the wall, Jake's face appeared. He looked cleaner than the last time I'd seen him, hair combed and wearing an orange jumpsuit. His eyes found me immediately through the camera, and he smiled like we were meeting for coffee. My whole body went cold. The judge asked Jake's lawyer to present his case first. The lawyer stood up and started talking about mental health discrimination and how Jake deserved a chance to prove paternity. He said Jake was taking his medication now and was stable. He said fathers have rights even when they're sick, and that keeping Jake away from his child was cruel and unusual punishment. Some people in the back of the courtroom clapped until the judge told them to be quiet. Harley stood up next. She had a folder full of papers that she started laying out on the table in front of the judge. She showed him my medical records proving I was already 8 weeks pregnant the last time Jake and I had any contact. She pulled up Jake's Facebook page on a laptop and the judge leaned forward to read the posts. His face got harder with each page. She played one of Jake's voicemails where he threatened to take the baby the moment I gave birth. She showed the payment records from Jake's mother to Jess, $3,000 over 4 months. Then she played parts of the live stream from our house. The judge watched Jake on the screen trying to break down our door while telling thousands of people I was kidnapping his baby. When the video ended, the judge took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Jake's lawyer started talking again about mental illness and father's rights. He said Jake couldn't be blamed for actions he took while unmedicated. He said the real villain was the mental health system that failed Jake. Some of the people in the gallery started shouting agreement. One man stood up and started filming on his phone. Another woman yelled that I was discriminating against sick people. The judge banged his gavel 3 times and told everyone to be quiet or leave. When they didn't stop, he ordered the bailiff to clear the courtroom. It took 10 minutes to get everyone out. They were still shouting in the hallway about injustice and father's rights. When the courtroom was finally empty except for us and the lawyers, the judge looked at Jake on the screen. He asked Jake directly if he understood that the baby wasn't his. Jake shook his head and said Jess had told him I was confused, that pregnancy hormones were making me believe Sam's lies. He said once the baby was born and he could take a paternity test, everyone would see the truth. The judge closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he started reading from a paper in front of him. He granted a 5-year restraining order against Jake. 500 yards minimum distance from me, Sam, our home, my workplace, and the hospital where I deliver. Jake couldn't contact me by phone, email, social media, or through other people. The judge also ordered Jake to stay in psychiatric treatment and keep taking his medication as a condition of his eventual release from the hospital. If he stopped treatment or medication, he'd go straight to jail. Then the judge looked at the papers about Jess. He ordered a separate restraining order against her with the same distance requirements. Harley told the judge that criminal charges were being filed against Jess for stalking by proxy and fraud. The judge nodded and said he'd sign whatever the prosecutor needed. My brother was called to testify next. He walked to the front of the courtroom and swore to tell the truth with his hand on a Bible. Harley asked him to explain what he'd found on Jess's phone and laptop. My brother's voice shook as he described the messages between Jess and Jake. Hundreds of them over 4 months. Photos of me at family dinners. Screenshots of my ultrasound pictures. My work schedule that Jess had gotten by asking my brother innocent questions. Details about my doctor appointments. Even a draft message with our home address and the hospital name that Jess had been planning to send. He showed the judge the bank statements proving Jess had received $3,000 from Jake's mother. Harley asked why he was testifying against his girlfriend. My brother looked at me for the first time that day. He said his sister's safety mattered more than any relationship. He said he'd been stupid and blind, but he wasn't going to keep protecting someone who'd put me and my baby in danger. Jess's lawyer tried to make her sound like a confused friend who didn't understand what she was doing. He said she thought she was helping Jake accept reality by giving him information. He said she never meant for things to get dangerous. But Harley pulled out the payment records and asked how someone receives $3,000 by accident. She asked if naive friends usually get paid for their help. The judge didn't look convinced by Jess's lawyer. After the hearing ended, my brother followed us out to the parking lot. He told me he'd moved out of the apartment he'd shared with Jess and was staying with a friend across town. He said he'd started seeing a therapist to figure out how he'd missed all the signs. He apologized again for not protecting me better. I wanted to stay angry at him, but he looked so broken that I couldn't. I told him I needed time before things could go back to normal between us. He nodded and said he understood. Sam and I drove back to Anya's apartment in silence. I kept thinking about Jake's face on that screen, still believing the delusion even with all the evidence right in front of him. That night, I checked the father's rights forums that had been posting about me. The restraining order had made everything worse. They were calling me a false accuser who'd weaponized the courts. They said I was using Jake's mental illness against him. Someone posted that they hoped I'd lose the baby as punishment for my lies. The comments got worse from there. Detective Putnam called the next morning and said he wanted me to meet with someone. Her name was Riley Chase, and she was a social worker who helped stalking victims. She had experience with cases where mental illness and online harassment mixed together. He gave me her number and told me to call her as soon as possible. I met Riley at a coffee shop near Anya's apartment 2 days later. She was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She ordered us both decaf and sat across from me with a notebook. She asked me to walk her through everything that had happened. When I finished, she wasn't shocked or surprised like most people. She just nodded and started writing. She told me the online harassment would probably get worse before it got better. The forums would keep posting about me and sharing conspiracy theories. But she said specific threats and doxing were crimes we could prosecute. She knew lawyers who specialized in getting content removed from websites and going after the worst harassers in civil court. She said we'd document every threat and every piece of personal information that got posted. She explained that we couldn't stop people from having opinions about me online, even terrible ones. Free speech protected that. But when they crossed into threats or sharing my address or workplace, that became criminal. She'd seen cases like mine before where internet mobs decided someone was the villain and wouldn't let go. Sometimes it took months or even years for them to move on to a new target. She gave me her card and told me to screenshot everything and send it to her. Every threat, every post with my information, every comment that seemed dangerous. She'd work with Detective Putnam and the FBI to build cases against the people who went too far. 3 days after I met with Riley, someone posted the name of the hospital where I was registered to deliver. They included my due date and said people should show up to document me leaving with Jake's baby. The post got shared across multiple forums within hours. Dr. Shaw called me that afternoon sounding worried. He said the hospital had received dozens of calls asking about me. Security had caught 2 men trying to get into the maternity ward that morning, claiming they were there to protect a baby. He told me we needed to transfer my care to a different hospital immediately. He'd already called a colleague across town and arranged everything. I'd be registered under a fake name, and only Dr. Shaw and his nurse would know my real identity. He sent the hospital security team my photo with instructions to call police if Jake or anyone suspicious showed up asking about me. Sam and I drove to the new hospital that evening to pre-register. The maternity ward was on the 4th floor with locked doors and cameras everywhere. A security guard sat at a desk checking IDs before letting anyone through. The nurse who processed my paperwork never used my real name out loud. She called me by the fake name Dr. Shaw had chosen and made me memorize it. She said when I came in to deliver, I'd need to use that name or they wouldn't admit me. Detective Putnam called with news about Jake. The psychiatric hold had been extended to 14 days. The doctor said he was still delusional and potentially dangerous even with medication. They wanted more time to adjust his treatment and make sure he was stable. Detective Putnam said this was good for us because it meant Jake would be locked up when I delivered. That same afternoon, Jake's mother showed up at Anya's apartment. Anya called me before letting her in, and I almost said no. But something made me agree to see her. She looked older than I remembered, with new gray in her hair. She sat on Anya's couch and cried while apologizing. She said she'd been desperate to help her son, and thought giving him information would help him accept reality. She said she'd paid Jess because Jess promised she could bring Jake and me back together. She'd believed Jess when Jess said I still loved Jake and just needed reminding. She said she realized now that she'd enabled Jake's delusions and made everything worse. She was working with the prosecutors and had given them all her records of the payments to Jess. She'd also signed papers giving Jake's doctors full control over his treatment, so he couldn't refuse medication anymore. She asked if there was anything she could do to help protect me and the baby. I told her the best thing she could do was make sure Jake stayed in treatment and on his medication for the rest of his life. She promised she would and left me her phone number in case I ever needed anything. 2 days after Jake's mother left, Sam and I met with a real estate agent named Jonathan, who specialized in secure apartments. He showed us 3 buildings across town, each one farther from our old neighborhood, and the memories of that terrible night. The first place had a doorman, but the windows felt too exposed, facing a busy street where anyone could stand and watch. The second had better security, but the rent made Sam's face go pale when Jonathan quoted the monthly cost. The third building sat on a quiet block with a gated entrance, cameras covering every angle, and a lobby guard who checked IDs before letting anyone past the front desk. The apartment itself was smaller than our house, just 2 bedrooms on the 4th floor, but the moment I walked in, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Safe. Sam squeezed my hand, and I knew he felt it too. Jonathan pulled out the paperwork and started explaining deposits and lease terms, while I calculated how much we'd need to move in. Between first month, last month, security deposit and moving costs, we were looking at nearly $8,000. We had maybe half that in savings. I felt my chest tighten as the safe feeling started slipping away. Jonathan must have seen my face change because he paused mid-sentence and asked if we needed a minute to discuss finances. Sam started to say we'd need to think about it when my phone rang. Detective Putnam. He asked where we were, and I told him about the apartment hunting. He was quiet for a second, then said he might be able to help with the costs through a victim assistance program the county ran for people whose homes had been compromised by stalkers. He said he'd already started the paperwork after seeing our situation, and thought we'd qualify for up to $10,000 in moving expenses. The relief made me dizzy. Sam took the phone and got the details while I sat on the apartment's empty living room floor, one hand on my belly where the baby was kicking. Jonathan gave us an hour to sort things out and stepped into the hallway. Detective Putnam connected Sam with someone from the Victim Services Office who confirmed they could expedite our application, given the urgency and the online threats. By the time Jonathan came back, we were signing the lease. My brother called that evening asking to meet somewhere neutral to talk. I almost said no, still angry about Jess and how long he'd let her access to our family continue. But Sam reminded me that my brother had been the one to finally expose what Jess was doing, that he'd given prosecutors everything they needed. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near Anya's apartment the next morning. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He'd ordered my usual decaf now because of the pregnancy, and the small gesture made my throat tight. He stood when he saw me but didn't try to hug me, just gestured to the chair across from him. We sat in awkward silence for a minute before he started talking. He said he'd moved out of the apartment he'd shared with Jess, couldn't stand being in the space where she'd plotted against me. He'd cut off all contact with her and changed his number so she couldn't reach him. He was cooperating fully with the prosecutors, had given them his testimony about finding the messages on her phone and the payments on her laptop. He said he knew sorry wasn't enough, that he should have seen what she was doing sooner, should have questioned why Jake always seemed to know things only family should know. His voice cracked when he said he'd chosen his relationship over his sister's safety, and he'd have to live with that. I let him finish before I spoke. I told him I appreciated his testimony and his cooperation with the police, that those actions mattered, but I also told him I wasn't ready to go back to how things were before, wasn't ready to trust him the way I used to. He needed to understand that rebuilding what we had would take time, maybe a long time, and I couldn't promise we'd ever get all the way back. He nodded and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He said he understood, that he'd spend however long it took proving he was trustworthy again. He asked if he could at least know when the baby was born, if there was a way to be part of his niece's life even from a distance. I thought about it for a minute, watching him sit there looking more broken than I'd ever seen him. I said maybe, eventually, but right now I needed space to feel safe and prepare for the baby without worrying about information leaking. He accepted that without argument, just asked me to let him know if I ever needed anything. We finished our coffee in silence, and he walked me back to my car, keeping his distance like he was afraid to get too close. 1 week before my due date, I woke up at 3 in the morning with pain that felt different from the cramping I'd been having. Sharper, deeper, radiating from my lower back around to my stomach. I lay there for a minute trying to decide if it was just more stress contractions, but then I felt wetness between my legs, and when I turned on the lamp, the sheets were spotted with blood. I shook Sam awake, and his eyes went wide when he saw the blood. He was out of bed and grabbing his keys before I could even sit up, helping me into sweatpants and shoes while calling the hospital to tell them we were coming. The drive felt endless even though the new hospital was only 15 minutes away. Every bump in the road sent fresh waves of pain through my abdomen, and I kept one hand pressed against my belly, feeling for the baby's movements. She was still kicking, but the movements felt different, more frantic. Sam ran 2 red lights and I didn't tell him to slow down. Dr. Shaw met us in the emergency entrance, already in scrubs like he'd been waiting. A nurse brought a wheelchair and they rushed me through hallways I didn't recognize to a room with monitors and equipment everywhere. Dr. Shaw examined me while explaining what he was checking for, his voice calm but his movements quick and precise. After a few minutes, he pulled back and told Sam to sit down. He said the stress had caused a partial placental abruption, which meant the placenta was starting to separate from my uterus wall. It wasn't a complete separation yet, but it was dangerous, could get worse fast, could cut off oxygen to the baby or cause me to bleed too much. My whole body went cold. I asked if the baby was okay, and Dr. Shaw said, "For now, yes. Her heart rate was strong and she was moving well, but we needed to act quickly." He said he was going to give me medication to try to stop the bleeding and stabilize the situation, but I'd need to stay in the hospital on complete bed rest. If the bleeding got worse or the baby showed signs of distress, they'd have to deliver immediately by emergency surgery. Sam's hand found mine and gripped hard. I thought about everything Jake had done, all the fear and stress he'd put us through and how now it might cost me my baby. The anger felt like fire in my chest, but I pushed it down because I needed to stay calm for her. Dr. Shaw started an IV and gave me the first dose of medication while nurses hooked me up to monitors that tracked my contractions and the baby's heartbeat. The sound of her heartbeat filled the room, steady and strong, and I focused on that sound while the medication worked, and the pain slowly started to ease. Dr. Shaw came back 2 hours later with test results and an ultrasound machine. He did a full scan of the baby and the placenta while explaining what he was seeing on the screen. The separation was small, he said, and the medication had stopped it from getting worse. The baby looked healthy, good size and position, strong heartbeat and movements. But he said I couldn't go home, needed to stay in the hospital under observation for at least 24 hours to make sure the bleeding didn't start again. After that, if everything stayed stable, I could go home but only on complete bed rest until delivery. No getting up except to use the bathroom, no stress, no visitors except Sam, and absolutely no exposure to anything related to Jake or the case. He said my body had been through too much and we needed to give the baby every possible chance to develop a little longer. But he also said we couldn't wait for natural labor anymore. The risk was too high. He wanted to schedule a controlled induction for 3 days from now, which would put me at 37 weeks. Not full term, but close enough that the baby should be fine, and the controlled environment would let them monitor everything and act fast if complications developed. I agreed immediately, just grateful there was a plan that might keep both of us safe. Dr. Shaw left to set up the induction schedule while Sam pulled a chair next to my bed and held my hand. A nurse came in to brief me on the bed rest rules and what to watch for, any new bleeding or pain or changes in the baby's movement. She also said the security team had been updated about my extended stay and the upcoming delivery. My photo and fake name were distributed to every staff member on the maternity floor, with instructions that I was a high-risk patient with a security situation. No one would be allowed into my room without showing ID to the guard posted outside my door. No information about me would be given out over the phone or to anyone who came asking. When the baby was born, she'd be registered under the fake name too until we could safely leave the hospital and update the records. The level of precaution should have made me feel paranoid, but instead it made me feel protected. These people were taking the threat seriously, doing everything they could to keep Jake and his supporters away from us. Detective Putnam called that afternoon with news about Jess that made my blood pressure spike enough to set off the monitors. A nurse came rushing in, and I had to take deep breaths and think calm thoughts until the numbers went back down before Detective Putnam would continue. He said Jess had violated her restraining order by creating a fake social media account under a different name to contact my brother. She'd sent him messages claiming she was pregnant with his child and needed to talk urgently, that she had important information about Jake he needed to hear. My brother had immediately screenshot everything and called the police instead of responding. Detective Putnam said they'd traced the account back to Jess within hours and arrested her at her parents' house where she'd been staying since making bail. Her bail was revoked and she was now in county jail awaiting trial. He said the violation showed she couldn't be trusted to follow court orders, and the prosecutor was using it to argue she should stay locked up until her trial date. I asked if she was really pregnant, or if that was just another manipulation. Detective Putnam said as far as they knew it was a lie, just another attempt to get my brother to break his silence and give her information she could pass to Jake. The coldness of it stunned me. Even facing criminal charges and a restraining order, Jess was still trying to help Jake, still trying to get access to information about me and the baby. Sam asked what would happen if she kept trying to make contact from jail, and Detective Putnam said they were monitoring her calls and mail, that any attempt to reach out to me or my family would add more charges. He said to focus on staying calm and healthy for the baby, that Jess couldn't hurt us anymore from behind bars. 2 days later, Detective Putnam called again with different news, this time about Jake. He said Jake had undergone another psychiatric evaluation as part of the court process, and something unexpected had happened. Jake had a moment of clarity where he acknowledged he wasn't the baby's father. His doctor told Detective Putnam that the new medication combination was finally working, that Jake's delusions were breaking down and he was starting to see reality. He'd apparently broken down crying during the evaluation, apologizing for everything he'd done and saying he didn't know why he'd believed the baby was his. The doctor was cautiously optimistic that with continued treatment, Jake might maintain this insight, but he also warned that Jake's grasp on reality was still fragile, that if he stopped taking his medication again, the delusions could come back just as strong. Detective Putnam said the court was taking this into account, and instead of releasing Jake to outpatient treatment, they were ordering him to a long-term psychiatric facility, where he'd live full-time and his medication would be supervised. He'd stay there for at least a year, possibly longer depending on his progress, and he couldn't leave without court approval. I asked if that meant he'd be locked up during the baby's birth and first months of life. Detective Putnam said yes, that by the time Jake was even eligible for evaluation for release, my daughter would be over a year old, and we'd have had time to establish our new life without him hovering over us. The relief was physical, like a weight lifting off my chest. Sam asked about the restraining order, and Detective Putnam said it would remain in effect regardless of Jake's treatment progress, that even if he got better, he wouldn't be allowed near us without my explicit permission. I said I couldn't imagine ever giving that permission, and Detective Putnam said that was completely my right. Harley Grimes, the prosecutor handling both Jake and Jess's cases, called me directly the next day to update me on the formal charges. Against Jake, she'd filed stalking charges, criminal trespass for breaking into our house, making terroristic threats for the things he'd said in his voicemails and messages, and violating the protective order for the baby shower incident and the workplace ambush. Each charge carried serious prison time, but given Jake's mental illness, Harley said the focus was on getting him long-term psychiatric treatment, rather than just punishment. She wanted him somewhere he couldn't hurt anyone, and where he'd have to stay on his medication. Against Jess, the charges were more extensive because Jess didn't have the mental illness defense. Harley had filed stalking by proxy for feeding Jake information, fraud for the payments she'd received from Jake's mother under false pretenses, conspiracy for coordinating with Jake to track my movements, and harassment for the social media posts supporting Jake's delusions. Harley said Jess was facing up to 5 years in prison if convicted on all counts, though she'd likely try for a plea deal. I asked what kind of deal she might get, and Harley said she wouldn't accept anything less than 3 years with mandatory counseling and full restitution for the costs her actions had caused us. The fathers' rights group leaders who'd organized the house invasion were facing criminal trespass and conspiracy charges. Harley said 3 of them had already accepted plea deals that included probation, community service, and orders to remove all content about me from their platforms. They also had to post public corrections admitting they'd been wrong about the situation. I asked if that would actually reach all the people who'd seen the original livestream, and Harley admitted probably not, but it was the best they could do legally. The important thing was establishing the truth in the court record, so if anyone did search my name, they'd find the real story. Riley Chase came to visit me in the hospital the day before my scheduled induction. She brought her laptop and said she wanted to help me prepare a victim impact statement for Jake's eventual sentencing hearing. I hadn't thought about having to face Jake again, even via video, and the idea made my heart rate spike. Riley saw the monitor jump and quickly reassured me that I wouldn't have to see him in person, could submit a written statement or record a video instead. But she said having a statement ready would be powerful, would help the judge understand the full impact of what Jake had done. We spent 2 hours working on it, Riley helping me organize my thoughts and focus on specific facts rather than just anger. She had me describe the machete incident 3 years ago, how I'd stayed to help Jake despite my fear, how I'd only left when his threats became too specific and too violent. Then the pregnancy announcement and Jake's immediate claim that the baby was his, despite us having no contact for over a year. The stalking escalation, the Facebook page, the baby shower attack, the workplace ambush, the home invasion with the live stream, the medical complications, the bleeding and placental abruption caused by stress, the fear that I might lose my baby because of his delusions. Writing it all down in chronological order was exhausting, but also cathartic, like I was finally organizing the chaos into something concrete and undeniable. Sam worked on his own statement in the corner of the room, writing about the fear of almost losing both me and our baby, about having to protect his family from someone who should have been safely in treatment. Riley said both statements would be powerful evidence of the harm Jake had caused and would help ensure he got the long-term treatment he needed. Detective Putnam called that evening to tell me the FBI's Cybercrimes Division had finished their investigation into the online harassment. They'd identified and interviewed the 3 most aggressive harassers who'd made specific threats against me. 2 of them, both men in their 30s from different states, were being charged with interstate harassment and cyberstalking. The third was a 17-year-old kid who'd gotten caught up in the father's rights rhetoric without understanding the reality of the situation. He was getting a warning and mandatory counseling instead of charges, but his parents had been informed and were horrified by what he'd done. Detective Putnam said several websites had removed Jake's Fighting for My Baby page and associated content after receiving legal demands from our lawyer. The page was still archived in a few places, and screenshots would probably circulate forever. But the main sources were gone, and anyone searching would now find articles about the arrests and charges instead. He said the online mob had mostly moved on to other causes, which was typical for internet outrage. I asked if we'd ever be completely free of it, and he was honest. Said probably not completely, but the worst of it was over. The people who mattered, the legal system and law enforcement, knew the truth. That would have to be enough. My brother proved his commitment to rebuilding trust by testifying at Jess's preliminary hearing 3 days after I delivered the baby. Sam stayed home with our daughter while Anya drove me to the courthouse, my body still sore from labor but determined to see Jess face consequences. My brother was already there, looking nervous in a suit I'd never seen him wear before. He saw me and started to approach but stopped when I didn't move toward him. Anya squeezed my hand and we took seats in the back of the courtroom. Jess was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back and her face without makeup. She looked smaller than I remembered, less threatening now that she was behind bars. The preliminary hearing was just to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial, but Harley Grimes was thorough, presenting every piece of evidence methodically. My brother took the stand and testified about finding the messages on Jess's phone, the payments on her laptop, the draft message with our address and hospital information. He described how Jess had lied to him for months, had used their relationship to gain access to family information she then sold to Jake's mother and fed to Jake himself. His voice stayed steady, but I could see his hands shaking as he held the printed evidence. Jess's lawyer tried to cross-examine him, suggesting he was lying to protect his sister, but my brother shut that down immediately. He said he was testifying because what Jess had done was wrong and dangerous, that she'd helped a mentally ill man stalk his pregnant sister and nearly caused the loss of his niece. He said he'd learned to recognize manipulation and wasn't going to let Jess minimize her actions or play victim. The judge ruled there was more than enough evidence to proceed to trial and set a date for 2 months from now. After the hearing, my brother came over to where Anya and I were standing. He didn't try to hug me or make excuses, just said he hoped his testimony showed he was serious about making things right. I told him it was a start, that I'd seen him choose the truth over protecting Jess, and that mattered. He said he'd also started attending a support group for people who'd been in relationships with manipulative partners, that he was learning to recognize the red flags he'd missed with Jess. He was working on his own judgment and his own healing, so he could be someone I could trust again. I nodded and said I appreciated that. Then Anya and I left to get back to Sam and the baby. On the drive home, Anya said my brother looked different, more grown up somehow. I agreed, said maybe almost losing his family had finally woken him up to reality. 2 days before my scheduled induction, Jake's mother showed up at Anya's apartment. Sam answered the door and stood blocking the entrance until I told him it was okay. She looked older than when I'd last seen her at the courthouse, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. She asked if we could talk for just a few minutes, and I led her to the small kitchen table while Sam hovered protectively nearby. She told me Jake had been transferred to a secure psychiatric facility 2 states away for long-term treatment. The doctors there specialized in treatment-resistant schizophrenia and had already adjusted his medication plan. She'd signed over medical power of attorney to his treatment team, so she couldn't interfere with their decisions even if she wanted to. She'd also set up a trust fund to ensure Jake would have lifetime care regardless of what happened to her. Her hands shook as she pulled out papers showing all the legal arrangements she'd made. She said she knew nothing could undo what Jake had done to me, what she had enabled by paying Jess for information. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to maintain a relationship. She just wanted me to know Jake would never be able to hurt me again, that she'd made sure of it. Then she asked if she could send a baby gift after delivery, maybe a savings bond or something practical that wouldn't require any contact between us. I told her I needed to think about it, that I wasn't ready to make decisions about any kind of connection between her and my daughter. She nodded and stood to leave, thanking me for even letting her explain. After she left, Sam asked if I was okay, and I realized I felt relieved rather than angry. Knowing Jake was far away in a secure facility, that his mother had given up control to professionals, made me feel safer than I had in weeks. The next morning, Detective Putnam called with news about the father's rights group. The 3 leaders who'd organized the invasion of our house had accepted plea deals. They'd each received 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and were ordered to remove all content about me from their websites and social media platforms. The plea deal also required them to post public corrections on their main pages, stating they'd been wrong about the situation, that I wasn't keeping a father from his child, that they'd participated in stalking a pregnant woman based on false information. Detective Putnam said the corrections wouldn't reach everyone who'd seen the original live stream, but it was a legal victory that established the truth in official records. Their followers would still believe what they wanted to believe, but anyone who looked into the case would find the court documents showing what really happened. He said the FBI was still investigating the more serious online threats and doxing, that several people might face federal charges. I thanked him for everything he'd done, and he told me he'd check in after the baby was born to make sure hospital security was maintaining protocols. Hanging up, I felt like another piece of the nightmare was dismantled, slowly but steadily. That evening, Anya surprised me by transforming her living room into a baby shower space. She'd invited Sam, my brother, and 2 other close friends whose information had never been compromised by Jess. There were pastel decorations, a small cake, and a pile of wrapped gifts on the coffee table. It was everything the original shower should have been, peaceful and joyful without the fear of Jake appearing. My brother arrived carrying a large wrapped box and hugged me carefully, mindful of my pregnant belly. We played simple games and ate cake while Anya told funny stories about her own mother's pregnancy with her. When I opened presents, there were practical things like diapers and baby clothes, but also thoughtful gifts like a handmade baby blanket from my brother. He'd learned to crochet specifically to make it, spending weeks on the intricate pattern. Inside was a card promising to be the best uncle, to protect his niece, to never let anyone hurt our family again. I started crying reading it and couldn't stop, overwhelmed by how different this felt from the chaos and terror of recent weeks. Sam held me while I cried, and my brother apologized for making me emotional. I told him these were good tears, that I needed to feel this kind of happiness again. Anya brought me tissues, and we spent the rest of the evening talking about normal things like baby names and nursery colors. For a few hours, I felt like a regular pregnant woman excited to meet her baby, not a stalking victim counting down to delivery. We arrived at the hospital at 6 in the morning, the sky still dark and the parking lot nearly empty. Sam carried our bags while I waddled through the automatic doors, my body heavy and uncomfortable. At registration, I gave the false name we'd arranged with hospital security, and the clerk's eyes flickered with recognition. She'd clearly been briefed about our situation. She processed us quickly and quietly, then called for an escort to take us upstairs. A security guard walked us to the maternity ward where a nurse was waiting. She introduced herself and led us to a private room at the end of the hall, away from the other patients. She explained that my room number wouldn't be posted anywhere, and only approved visitors would be allowed on the floor. Dr. Shaw arrived 20 minutes later, reviewing my chart and checking my blood pressure. He said my body had been under enormous stress and the delivery might be complicated because of it. His team was prepared for anything that might happen. He explained the induction process, how they'd start medication to begin contractions and monitor me closely throughout. Sam pulled a chair close to the bed and took my hand as the nurse inserted the IV. The medication started dripping into my veins, and Dr. Shaw said it would take a few hours before real labor began. He told me to try to rest while I could. Sam squeezed my hand and I closed my eyes, trying to relax despite knowing what was coming. Labor started slowly, just mild cramping at first that gradually built into real contractions. By mid-morning, I was breathing through them, gripping Sam's hand while the nurse checked my progress. The contractions got stronger through the afternoon, coming closer together until I couldn't talk through them anymore. Between contractions, I thought about how different this experience was from what I'd imagined months ago. I'd pictured a joyful delivery with family visiting and flowers filling the room. Instead, I was registered under a fake name with security outside my door, still afraid Jake might somehow find us. His delusions had stolen so much joy from what should have been the happiest time of my life. But then I'd look at Sam sitting beside me, his face full of love and concern, and I'd remember what mattered most. We were about to meet our daughter. She'd be safe and loved and protected. Jake's illness had tried to destroy us, but we'd survived. The contraction would end and I'd breathe again, focusing on Sam's steady presence and the life we were bringing into the world. Another contraction would start, and I'd grip his hand harder, riding the wave of pain while he counted breaths with me. The hours blurred together, pain and rest, and Sam's voice anchoring me through it all. At 4:47 in the afternoon, after 12 hours of labor, our daughter was born. She came out screaming and perfect, her little face scrunched up and furious at being forced into the cold world. The nurse placed her on my chest, and I felt a fierce protective love that made everything we'd been through worth it. She weighed 7 pounds 4 ounces and had dark hair like Sam's, already thick and damp against her tiny skull. I couldn't stop staring at her, counting her fingers and toes, amazed that she was real and here and ours. Sam was crying as he cut the umbilical cord, his hands shaking with emotion. When he looked at me, I saw the fear of the past weeks finally leave his face, replaced by pure joy and wonder. He kissed my forehead, and then touched our daughter's cheek gently, whispering that he'd keep us both safe forever. The nurse took her to clean and weigh her while Dr. Shaw finished the delivery. When they brought her back wrapped in a hospital blanket, Sam held her for the first time, and I watched him fall completely in love. He rocked her gently, and told her about all the things he'd show her, all the ways he'd protect her, all the love she'd have. I was exhausted and sore, but happier than I'd ever been. Hospital security kept strict watch during our 2-day stay. No visitors were allowed except my brother and Anya, who came separately and had to show ID before being escorted to our room. The nursing staff used the false name on all paperwork, and my room number wasn't posted on any board or door. Every nurse who entered checked our wristbands and confirmed our identities before providing care. Detective Putnam called twice to confirm there'd been no suspicious activity around the hospital, no one asking questions about recent deliveries or trying to access maternity ward records. He said Jake's supporters online had mostly moved on to other causes, though a few diehards were still posting conspiracy theories. He'd alerted hospital security about specific usernames to watch for. My brother visited the evening after delivery, bringing flowers and a stuffed animal for his niece. He held her carefully, tears streaming down his face as he told her he'd always protect her. Anya came the next morning with a care package full of snacks and magazines, sitting with me while Sam went to the cafeteria. She said I looked tired but happy, that she'd been so worried during the stalking, but seeing me now with my daughter made her believe everything would be okay. On our second day in the hospital, Detective Putnam visited in person. He looked serious as he closed the door behind him, and I felt my stomach drop, afraid of what news he was bringing. He sat down and told us Jake's psychiatric team had made a significant discovery. While going through Jake's belongings at the facility, they'd found journals detailing his growing delusions about me. He'd been writing for months about how we were meant to be together, how Sam had stolen me, how the baby was his despite all evidence otherwise. The journals showed clear premeditation even within his psychosis. He'd been planning to confront me, to take me back, to raise the baby as his own. What made it worse was evidence that he'd been hiding his medications for months before the stalking got bad. The journals mentioned crushing pills and faking swallowing them, deliberately avoiding treatment because the voices told him the medication was keeping us apart. The psychiatric team said this explained his rapid deterioration from stable to dangerous. It also meant his actions weren't just spontaneous breaks from reality, but calculated behavior driven by untreated delusions. Detective Putnam said this evidence strengthened the criminal case considerably. It showed Jake had capacity to plan and deceive even while delusional, which would matter during sentencing. He asked if I wanted to read the journals, and I said no immediately. I didn't need to see inside Jake's broken mind. I just needed to know he couldn't hurt us anymore. The next afternoon, Harley Grimes called with an update on Jake's case. His lawyer was negotiating a plea deal that would send him to a psychiatric prison facility for a minimum of 5 years with mandatory treatment. The facility specialized in mentally ill offenders and had strict protocols for medication compliance. After 5 years, Jake could only be released if doctors certified he was no longer a danger, and he demonstrated consistent medication compliance. If he stopped taking medication or showed signs of deteriorating, he'd remain confined indefinitely. Harley said the plea deal was the best outcome we could hope for, because it guaranteed long-term treatment while keeping Jake away from us. A trial would be risky and might result in a shorter sentence if the jury sympathized with his mental illness. The plea deal also avoided me having to testify in detail about everything that happened. I told her I supported the deal because I wanted Jake to get help, not just punishment. I didn't hate him for being mentally ill. I hated what his untreated illness had done to all of us. If 5 years of treatment could help him, if it could prevent him from hurting someone else in the future, then that mattered. Harley said she'd finalize the deal and schedule a plea hearing for next month. I'd have the option to submit a victim impact statement but wouldn't have to appear in person if I didn't want to. I thanked her and hung up feeling relieved that this part was moving toward resolution. A few days after we brought our daughter home, Harley called again about Jess's case. Her trial date was set for 2 months from now, but her lawyer had approached prosecutors about a plea deal. Jess was willing to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a 3-year sentence with possibility of parole after 18 months. The deal would also require her to pay restitution for our therapy costs and moving expenses, plus complete a mental health program addressing her manipulation and boundary issues. My brother called right after Harley did. His voice strained as he asked what I thought about the plea deal. He said part of him wanted Jess to face a full trial and maximum sentence for what she'd done, but another part just wanted it over, so we could all move forward. I told him I supported the plea deal if it included the restitution and mental health treatment. Jess needed to face real consequences, but she also needed help understanding why what she did was so wrong. 3 years was significant time, and the restitution would take her years to pay off. My brother was quiet for a moment, then said he'd tell prosecutors we supported it. He added that he'd started dating someone new, taking things very slowly, being careful about red flags. He said therapy was helping him understand how Jess had manipulated him and how he'd ignored warning signs. I told him I was proud of him for doing that work, and he thanked me before hanging up. The new apartment building felt like a fortress compared to our old house. Sam carried our daughter through the lobby while I followed with the diaper bag, my legs still wobbly from 2 days in the hospital. The doorman nodded at us and made a note in his log. Cameras tracked our movement from 3 different angles. Sam had already given the building manager photos of Jake and Jess with strict instructions not to let them pass the entrance under any circumstances. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt safe in a way I hadn't experienced in months. Sam unlocked our door and I stepped inside to find the nursery completely set up. Anya had helped him arrange everything while I was in labor. The crib sat against the far wall with a mobile hanging above it. My brother had assembled the changing table and stocked it with diapers and wipes. Everything was ready for us. I settled into the rocking chair with my daughter and felt my shoulders drop for the first time since Jake had broken into our house. The windows had security locks. The door had a deadbolt and chain. Nobody could get to us here without going through multiple layers of protection. Sam sat on the floor next to the chair and put his hand on my knee. Our daughter made small sleeping noises against my chest. This was what safety felt like. The first night home, she woke up every 2 hours. Sam and I took turns stumbling to the nursery in the dark, changing diapers and warming bottles. By morning, we were both exhausted, but neither of us complained. This was normal new parent exhaustion, not the crushing fear that had defined my pregnancy. My daughter needed me, and I could focus on her without constantly looking over my shoulder. The second day, my brother called before coming over. He asked if noon worked, and I said yes. He arrived with a gift bag full of baby clothes and a card that made me cry. He held his niece for an hour while she slept, his face soft with wonder. When he handed her back, he thanked me for trusting him enough to visit. I told him he was earning it back slowly. He nodded and said he understood. The third day, Anya stopped by with groceries and stayed to help me figure out the baby swing. She didn't ask about Jake or Jess. She just focused on making sure I had everything I needed. By the end of the first week, I'd established a routine. Feed the baby, change the baby, try to sleep when the baby slept. Sam went back to work but came home for lunch every day to check on us. My brother visited every other day, always calling first and never staying too long. He was patient with my wariness, never pushing for more access than I was ready to give. He'd bring coffee or dinner and hold his niece while I showered or napped. I could see how much he loved her already. His eyes would get wet when she grabbed his finger. Detective Putnam called on day 8 to tell me the investigation was officially closed. Jake was in custody at the psychiatric facility, and Jess was in county jail awaiting trial. All the evidence had been collected and processed. The father's rights group members who'd invaded our house had accepted plea deals. The online harassment campaign had been documented for potential federal charges. Everything was wrapped up from a police perspective. He asked if he could stop by to meet the baby and bring a gift. I hesitated, but Sam said it was fine, so I agreed. Detective Putnam arrived the next afternoon with a stuffed elephant and a card. He held my daughter carefully, like she was made of glass. He told us he'd worked hundreds of stalking cases over his career, but ours stood out because of how the mental health issues and online components had intersected to create such a dangerous situation. He said he was using our case as a training example for other officers. He wanted them to understand how social media could amplify delusions and create mob behavior that made victims even more vulnerable. He thanked us for being cooperative witnesses and said the documentation we'd provided had made building the case much easier. Before he left, he reminded us that the restraining orders were in place and being monitored. If Jake or Jess violated them, he'd know immediately. Riley called every week to check on me. She asked how I was sleeping and whether the nightmares had gotten better. I admitted they hadn't. I kept dreaming that Jake was in the apartment, that he'd gotten past all the security somehow. I'd wake up convinced I heard footsteps in the hallway. Sam would turn on all the lights to show me we were alone and safe. Riley said what I was feeling was normal after sustained trauma. She called it hypervigilance. My nervous system was still in protection mode even though the actual threat was gone. She taught me grounding techniques to use when the anxiety got bad. 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, 1 thing I could taste. She said it would help my brain recognize I was in the present moment, not back in the dangerous past. She also taught me how to separate real threats from trauma responses. The doorbell ringing didn't mean Jake had found us. It meant the delivery person had arrived with diapers. My brother calling didn't mean something was wrong. It meant he wanted to visit his niece. Slowly, I was learning to distinguish between actual danger and my body's overreaction to normal stimuli. Riley said it would take time, but I would get better at it. She also helped me process the guilt I felt about my daughter being born into all this chaos. I kept thinking she deserved a mother who wasn't constantly afraid, who could enjoy her without jumping at every sound. Riley reminded me that I'd protected my daughter through everything. I'd kept her safe when she was most vulnerable. That was what mattered. 2 weeks after bringing my daughter home, I drove to Harley's office for Jake's plea hearing. She'd set up a video conference so I wouldn't have to go to the courthouse. I sat in her conference room with Sam beside me and watched Jake appear on the screen. He looked different. His hair was cut short and he wore clean clothes. His eyes were clear instead of wild. The medication was working. His lawyer spoke first, explaining that Jake was accepting full responsibility for his actions and pleading guilty to all charges. Then Jake spoke directly to the camera. He said he was sorry for everything he'd put me through. He said he understood now that his delusions had made him dangerous, and that he'd refused to acknowledge his illness for too long. He said he was committed to staying on his medication and participating in treatment. He asked me to forgive him someday, though he knew he didn't deserve it. His psychiatrist testified next. She explained that Jake had been experiencing a prolonged psychotic episode triggered by medication noncompliance. She said he now had insight into his delusions and was working hard in therapy to understand what had happened. She recommended the psychiatric prison facility because Jake needed long-term structured treatment with accountability. The judge asked me if I wanted to speak. Harley had prepared a victim impact statement for me, but I decided not to read it. I just said I supported the plea deal because I wanted Jake to get help. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced Jake to 5 years in the psychiatric facility with mandatory treatment. He could only be released if doctors certified he was stable and no longer dangerous. If he stopped taking medication or showed signs of deteriorating, he'd stay confined. Harley said it was the best outcome we could have hoped for. Jess's plea hearing happened the following week. This time I attended in person with Sam and my brother. We sat in the courtroom while Jess was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face pale without makeup. Her lawyer explained that she was pleading guilty to stalking by proxy, fraud, conspiracy, and harassment. In exchange, she'd receive 3 years with possibility of parole after 18 months. She'd also have to pay back all the money Jake's mother had given her, plus additional money for our therapy costs and moving expenses. The judge asked if she wanted to make a statement. Jess stood up and read from a piece of paper. She said she was sorry for betraying my trust and enabling Jake's delusions. She said she'd convinced herself she was helping Jake by giving him information about me. She thought if he just saw me and talked to me, he'd accept that we weren't together anymore and move on. She admitted she'd taken money from Jake's mother, and that the financial motivation had clouded her judgment. She said she understood now that what she'd done was dangerous and wrong. She asked for my forgiveness, but said she knew she didn't deserve it. The judge was not sympathetic. He told Jess that her actions had put a pregnant woman and unborn child in serious danger. He said taking money to provide information to a stalker was particularly egregious. He accepted the plea deal but made it clear that if she violated any terms of her sentence, she'd serve the full 3 years without possibility of parole. He also ordered her to have no contact with me, Sam, or my daughter for the rest of her life. After the hearing, my brother walked with us to the parking garage. He said seeing Jess accept responsibility had helped him find some closure. He'd spent months wondering if he'd missed obvious signs, or if she'd been that good at hiding her true nature. His therapist was helping him understand that Jess had been manipulative from the start, and that he shouldn't blame himself for trusting someone he loved. He told us he'd started dating someone new, a woman he'd met at the gym. They were taking things very slowly. He was being careful about red flags and paying attention to how she treated other people. He was applying everything he'd learned in therapy about recognizing manipulation tactics. He asked if he could babysit his niece sometimes. I looked at Sam and then back at my brother. I told him yes, but we'd start with short visits while Sam or I were home. He nodded and said that was fair. He'd proven himself trustworthy over the past 2 months by respecting every boundary I'd set and being honest about his own healing process. He deserved a chance to be the uncle he wanted to be. 3 months passed quickly. My daughter grew and changed every day. She started smiling and making cooing sounds. She slept for longer stretches at night. Sam and I adjusted to being parents. The online harassment that had been so intense during the stalking gradually died down. The father's rights groups moved on to other causes and other people to target. The posts about me were still out there, but they got buried under newer content. Most people who'd believed Jake's story never saw the court records or news articles that told the truth. But enough people did that. The narrative shifted. Riley helped me work with a lawyer to get the worst content removed from search results and social media platforms. We sent legal demands to websites hosting Jake's Facebook page and similar content. Most of them complied rather than face lawsuits. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. I could search my own name without seeing dozens of posts calling me a villain. Sam suggested couples counseling, and I agreed immediately. We'd survived something that destroyed many relationships. We needed help processing the trauma together and making sure we stayed strong. Our counselor met with us every week. She helped us talk about the fear we'd both felt and the ways we'd supported each other through the crisis. She pointed out that we'd communicated well under extreme pressure and trusted each other when it mattered most. Those were foundations we could build on. She also helped us process our individual trauma responses. Sam had nightmares about not being able to protect us. I had panic attacks when unexpected things happened. We learned how to support each other through those moments without taking on each other's anxiety. One night after a session, Sam told me he wanted to marry me. He said he'd been planning to propose before everything happened with Jake, but he'd wanted to wait until we were both healed enough to actually enjoy planning a wedding. He didn't want our engagement to be overshadowed by trauma. I told him I felt the same way. We agreed to wait a little longer, until we felt more settled and peaceful. I took my daughter to her 4-month checkup on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Shaw measured and weighed her, checked her reflexes, asked about her feeding and sleeping patterns. He said she was healthy and developing perfectly. He told me he was proud of how I'd protected her through everything. He said a lot of women in my situation would have gone into premature labor, or had serious complications from the stress, but I'd managed to carry her to term and deliver her safely. He said that took real strength. He cleared me to return to work part-time if I wanted, though he recommended continuing therapy to manage any lingering stress. I told him I was thinking about it. Sam and I had talked about me staying home for the first year, but I missed working and having adult conversations that weren't about diapers or feeding schedules. Dr. Shaw said whatever I decided was fine as long as I was taking care of my mental health. He reminded me that postpartum depression could be made worse by trauma, and I should watch for warning signs. I promised I would. I got a call from Detective Putnam 2 weeks later. He said Jake's treatment team reported he was doing well with a new medication mix. Jake was going to therapy every day and talking about what he'd done. The doctor said he understood now that the baby wasn't his, and that he'd hurt me badly. Jake asked his mother to tell me he was sorry. Detective Putnam made it clear that Jake wouldn't be getting out anytime soon, probably not for years, but the doctors thought he might actually get better if he kept taking his medicine. I thanked Detective Putnam and hung up. Part of me was glad Jake was getting help. Part of me still felt angry that it took all this to make him take his medicine seriously. My brother came over that evening after I texted him. We sat on the couch while Sam held the baby in the nursery. My brother looked tired, older than he had a few months ago. He told me he'd been seeing a therapist twice a week to work through everything with Jess. I said I was glad he was getting help. He asked if I'd ever forgive him for not seeing what she was doing. I looked at him for a long time before I answered. I told him I forgave him. He started crying right there on my couch, covering his face with his hands. He said he'd been working so hard to be someone I could trust again, that he knew he'd failed me by not seeing through Jess sooner. I hugged him and told him we'd be okay. We agreed to start having family dinners once the baby was a little older, maybe once a week. He said he wanted to be the best uncle possible. I believed him. 6 months passed faster than I expected. The baby was sitting up on her own and starting to eat solid foods. Anya convinced me to join a mom and baby class at the community center on Tuesday mornings. I was nervous the first time we went. I kept looking over my shoulder in the parking lot, checking to make sure no one was following us. Inside the community center, there were 8 other moms with babies around the same age. We did songs and played with toys on colorful mats. After class, one of the other moms asked if I wanted to get coffee. Her name was Rachel, and her daughter was 2 weeks older than mine. We sat in the coffee shop attached to the community center and talked about sleep schedules and teething. Rachel asked about my daughter's father. I didn't hesitate. I told her about Sam, about how supportive he'd been through everything, about how he was an amazing dad. I didn't mention Jake or the stalking or any of it. For the first time in months, I talked about my family without feeling like I had to defend or explain anything. It felt normal. It felt good. Sam proposed on our daughter's first birthday. We'd had a small party that afternoon with just my brother Anya and a few close friends. After everyone left and we put the baby down for the night, Sam asked me to sit with him in the living room. He got down on one knee right there on our apartment carpet. He said I was the strongest person he'd ever met. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life making me feel as safe and loved as I made him feel. He said he wanted to be my husband and raise our daughter together and build a real family. I said yes before he even finished talking. I was crying and laughing at the same time. The ring on my finger, and we held each other for a long time. We'd survived the worst thing I could imagine. Everything else felt possible now. We started planning the wedding right away. We decided to keep it small, just 20 people we trusted completely. My brother would walk me down the aisle since our parents had both passed away years ago. Anya would be my maid of honor. Our daughter would be the flower girl, though at 15 months old, she'd probably just toddle down the aisle or need to be carried. My brother had started dating someone new, a woman named Claire who worked at the hospital. We'd met her 3 times before we agreed she could come to the wedding. Sam's parents were flying in from Arizona. His sister and her husband would be there too. We picked a date 3 months out, enough time to plan but not so far away that we'd get stressed about it. A letter arrived 2 months before the wedding. Detective Putnam called to tell me it was coming. Jake's mother had written to ask if she could see her granddaughter once a year under supervision. I talked to Sam about it for a long time. We called Riley and asked what she thought. Riley said it was completely my choice, but that supervised visits with a grandparent were different from contact with Jake himself. She said if I decided to allow it, we should wait until our daughter was at least 2 years old and set very strict rules. I thought about it for a week. Finally, I told Detective Putnam to let Jake's mother know I'd agree to supervised visits starting when my daughter turned 2. The visits would happen at a neutral location with a social worker present. Jake's mother could not talk about Jake or show pictures of him. If she broke any rules, the visits would stop forever. Detective Putnam said Jake's mother cried when he told her. She said she understood and was grateful for any chance to know her granddaughter. The wedding day was perfect. Anya's parents had a big backyard with old trees and a garden. We set up chairs in rows and hung white lights in the branches. 20 people sat and watched as my brother walked me down the grass aisle. Our daughter wore a tiny white dress and my brother's girlfriend Claire carried her, since walking was still an adventure at that age. Sam stood at the front with his best friend from college as his best man. He was crying before I even reached him. My brother gave a speech during the reception about family and trust and second chances. He talked about how he'd almost lost me by not protecting me better, and how grateful he was that I'd forgiven him. Half the guests were crying by the time he finished. Sam and I had written our own vows. We promised to protect each other and our daughter. We promised to talk through our fears instead of hiding them. We promised to build a life based on love instead of letting trauma define us. When we kissed, everyone cheered. Anya watched the baby for our honeymoon. We only went 2 hours away to a bed and breakfast in the mountains, but it felt like a different world. For 3 days, we slept in and ate breakfast in bed and took long walks without checking over our shoulders. We talked about buying a house with a yard someday. We talked about maybe having another baby in a few years when we felt ready. We talked about Sam's job and my plans to go back to work part-time. We didn't talk about Jake or Jess or any of the bad stuff. We just talked about our future, about the life we were building together. On the last night, we sat on the porch and watched the sunset. Sam said he'd never been happier. I realized I felt the same way. We weren't defined by what Jake had done anymore. We were defined by what we'd built together, by the family we'd chosen and protected. I went back to work part-time when our daughter was 8 months old. I found a job with a small marketing company that let me work from home 3 days a week and come into the office 2 days. My brother babysat on Tuesdays and Thursdays, proving himself reliable and patient with his niece. He was good with her, always on time, always following our instructions about naps and feeding. Watching him with her helped me trust him fully again. Sam's career was going well. He got a promotion that came with a raise. We started saving money seriously for the first time, putting away money each month for a down payment on a house. We looked at listings online and talked about what we wanted. A yard for sure, 3 bedrooms so the baby could have her own room and we could have a guest room. A good school district. We weren't in a hurry, but it felt good to have a plan, to be working towards something together. Harley Grimes called me on a Tuesday morning while I was working from home. She said Jake had been moved to a different facility, one that was less secure than where he'd been. I felt my stomach drop. She explained quickly that he couldn't be released for at least 4 more years, probably longer. The restraining order was still active and would be for years. But Jake had done so well with his treatment that the doctors recommended moving him somewhere he'd have more freedom and better therapy options. Harley said it was actually a good sign that he was getting better. I called Riley as soon as I hung up with Harley. Riley talked me through my panic. She reminded me that Jake getting better was the best possible outcome for everyone, including me. A Jake who stayed on his medication and understood what he'd done was much safer than a Jake who stayed sick and angry. She was right, but it still scared me. I told Sam that night and he held me while I cried. He promised we were safe, that Jake couldn't get to us, that we'd built a good life and nothing was going to take it away. Our daughter took her first steps on a Tuesday afternoon in May. The sun came through the living room windows and made bright squares on the carpet. She'd been cruising along the furniture for weeks, holding onto the couch and the coffee table while she moved around the room. Sam and I sat on opposite sides of the living room with maybe 6 feet between us. My brother was there too, sitting on the couch with his phone out. Our daughter stood by the couch, one hand on the cushion for balance. She looked at Sam and then at me. Sam held out his hands and said her name. She let go of the couch. She took one wobbly step, then another, then 3 more before she fell forward into Sam's arms. My brother was crying and filming at the same time. Sam picked her up and spun her around while she laughed. I realized in that moment that I was genuinely happy. The fear that used to wake me up at night had faded into something I could manage. The hypervigilance that made me check every car in the parking lot had become occasional anxiety instead of constant terror. We'd built a beautiful life from the ashes of what Jake had done to us. 2 years after everything happened, I found out I was pregnant again. This time we'd planned it. This time there was joy instead of fear. Sam and I sat our daughter down on the couch between us. She was almost 3 now, talking in full sentences and obsessed with dinosaurs. Sam told her she was going to be a big sister. She clapped her hands and asked if the baby would like dinosaurs too. My brother came over that night and brought a gift for his future niece or nephew. He hugged me and said he was thrilled. I placed my hand on my growing belly and felt grateful for the family we'd chosen and protected. We'd survived. We'd healed. We were genuinely thriving now.